Hey guys, welcome to Peter Stories. Before we start these amazing stories, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. And tell me, where are you watching from? I want to know. David Sterling checked his GPS for the third time in 5 minutes. It wasn't anxiety, it was method. 7 years as a forest ranger in Olympic National Park had burned certain habits into his mind, and even 3 years after leaving the service, they remained intact. Check equipment, verify routes, calculate daylight hours. 5:47 a.m. The sun wouldn't rise for another 40 minutes, but David was already loading his pack into the Honda Pilot. Total isolation for 72 hours. No cell phone. Purposely left at home. No emergencies. No excuses to run back to Seattle and his environmental safety consulting office. Dr. Reeves had been clear. You're burned out, David. Not physically, mentally. 3 years analyzing environmental impact reports, reviewing safety protocols. You've become a technocrat. You need to reconnect with what brought you to this field. The therapist was right, of course. David felt it every morning when he woke up, the sensation that he was operating on autopilot, processing information without really feeling the work. That's why he chose the Hoh River Trail in the Olympic. Familiar territory, but challenging enough to force him to use instincts that had been dormant. He drove for 2 hours through the temperate rainforest, passing through forks as the sun finally appeared between the trees. Morning mist created golden corridors of light between the massive trunks of cedar and Douglas fir. Even inside the car, David could smell the characteristic scent: wet moss, decomposing wood, the clean aroma of running water. He parked at the trailhead at 8:15 a.m. 3 other cars in the parking lot, normal for a Thursday in October. David had always preferred off-season trails. Fewer people, more silence, better chance to observe wildlife without interference. While organizing his equipment, he noticed peripheral movement. A blue Toyota Camry was parked at the far end, engine still running, vapor coming from the exhaust in the cold air. David couldn't see who was inside due to the tinted windows, but something bothered him. Maybe it was the position, angled to have a perfect view of the entire parking lot. Professional paranoia, he muttered to himself. Years working in security developed this kind of hypervigilance. He locked the car and began walking toward the trail. That's when he noticed the first anomaly. Silence. David stopped at the beginning of the trail and tilted his head. 20 meters into the forest, and there wasn't a single animal sound. No birds, no squirrels, no buzz of insects, just the distant sound of the Hoh River and his own boots compacting wet leaves. 7 years of experience had taught David that complete silence in the forest always meant one of 3 things: presence of a large predator, disturbing human activity, or something was fundamentally wrong with the ecosystem. He activated his first special ability almost without realizing it: exceptional tracking. Eyes scanning the ground, registering details most people would never notice. 2-day-old deer tracks, still clear in the mud. Black bear claw marks on a tree, but old, at least a week. And then, something that shouldn't be there. Human footprint. Hiking boot, size 10 or 11, with a specific sole pattern, Vibram Mega Grip, the same type David wore. But the print was in an impossible location. 3 meters off the trail, in terrain any experienced hiker would avoid due to dense undergrowth. David approached and crouched. The print was fresh, less than 24 hours. Depth indicated body weight of approximately 180 pounds. But the strangest thing was the direction. The print pointed directly toward the trail, as if someone had been hidden in the vegetation watching whoever passed by. Probably some inexperienced idiot, David said aloud, but his voice sounded strange in the unnatural silence. He continued walking, but now his second special ability was active: nature reading, eyes constantly moving, interpreting environmental signs. The vegetation was disturbed. Not drastically, but subtly. Broken branches here and there, always at shoulder height of an adult man. Small depressions in the moss where someone had recently stepped, trying to get off the main trail. David stopped again after 20 minutes of walking. The silence persisted, and now it had another quality, expectation, as if the forest was waiting for something. That's when he heard the first unnatural sound, distant metallic click, coming from the direction he had just passed. David turned slowly. Nothing visible through the trees, but the sound had been unmistakable. Metal against metal, maybe a backpack buckle, maybe a carabiner, maybe another click. This time from the right, maybe 50 meters away. David felt his third ability awaken. Human presence detection, hair on the back of his neck standing up, sensation of being watched. It wasn't paranoia, it was instinct, calibrated by thousands of hours in the forest, the developed ability to sense when he wasn't alone. Someone was following him, and whoever it was knew exactly what they were doing. Gradual escalation. David continued walking, but now every step was calculated. He maintained normal pace, but mind at maximum alert. Whoever was following him was professional. He couldn't hear footsteps, just the occasional clicks that seemed almost purposeful. 2 hours into the trail, he reached the first fork. Forest Service sign indicated Hoe Lake Trail, 5, 2 miles to the left. Mineral Creek Trail, 3.8 miles to the right. David had planned to take the left fork, but something made him pause. Fresh boot prints on both trails. Same vibram pattern, same size. But that was impossible. The prints were too fresh to be from the same person, who would have had to run ahead to make both sets. David activated his fourth ability, investigative intuition, pattern recognition that others wouldn't perceive. He examined the prints more carefully. Slight differences in wear pattern on the left heel. These weren't from the same boot. Someone was wearing identical footwear, or 2 people, he whispered. The realization hit him like cold water. He wasn't being followed by one person. It was coordinated, professional, someone who knew his planned route and had positioned people accordingly. David pulled out his map and compass. His fifth ability kicked in, natural orientation. Even without GPS, he could navigate these woods blindfolded. But more importantly, he could detect when something was wrong with the terrain itself. The trail marker was wrong. Mineral Creek Trail was supposed to be 4.2 miles, not 3.8. A small difference, but David had walked this trail dozens of times. Someone had replaced the official marker with a fake one. His hands started to sweat despite the cold. This wasn't random. Someone had planned this meticulously, anticipated his route, prepared the environment. But why? David chose neither trail. Instead, he activated his sixth and most developed ability, spatial memory. Years of walking these woods had created a photographic map in his mind. There was an old ranger service path, unmarked and unofficial, that branched off about 200 meters ahead. It would take him toward the same destination, but through terrain most people couldn't navigate. As he walked toward the hidden path, David noticed more signs of interference. Small branches deliberately bent to create sightlines. Moss scraped away to reveal fresh soil, marking techniques. Someone had been preparing this area for days, maybe weeks. The metallic clicks were getting more frequent now, and closer. David reached the unmarked path and paused. His nature-reading ability was screaming warnings. The forest felt wrong here, not just quiet, actively hostile. Small birds that should be present were gone. Even insects seemed to be avoiding the area. He pulled out his water bottle and took a sip, using the motion to scan his surroundings. There, 50 meters back, slight movement behind a massive cedar. Too deliberate to be an animal, too careful to be an amateur hiker. "Okay," David said quietly to himself. "Let's see what you want." Instead of taking the hidden path, he walked directly toward the cedar tree. No point in pretending he hadn't noticed. If this was going to be a confrontation, better to control when and where. The movement stopped as soon as he changed direction. Whoever was there had noticed his change of behavior and was adapting. Professional hunter behavior. David stopped 20 meters from the tree. "I know you're there," he called out. "Been following me for 2 hours. If you want something, let's talk." Silence. Then, unexpectedly, a voice. Calm, educated, with a slight Midwest accent. "Very good, Mr. Sterling. Your reputation wasn't exaggerated." David felt ice in his veins. The voice knew his name. This wasn't a random encounter. "You have me at a disadvantage," David replied, keeping his voice steady. "Should I know you?" A figure stepped out from behind the cedar. Tall, maybe 6'2", lean build, mid-40s, wearing expensive hiking gear, not the kind bought for show, but the practical stuff serious outdoorsmen used. Most disturbing were his eyes. Intelligent, calculating, and completely calm. "Dr. Marcus Webb," the man said with a slight smile. "I've been looking forward to meeting you." Mutual recognition. David's mind immediately catalogued everything about the man in front of him. Military bearing despite civilian clothes. Hands positioned for quick movement, standing in a position with multiple escape routes. But most telling, he wasn't armed visibly, which meant either he was confident enough to not need weapons or had them concealed. "Dr. Webb," David repeated. "Medical doctor or PhD?" "Psychology. Forensic psychology, to be specific. I specialized in predator behavior patterns before my career change." Webb's smile never wavered. "I know quite a bit about you, Mr. Sterling. 7 years with the Forest Service. Exemplary record. 53 successful search and rescue operations. Never lost a person under your watch." David felt his danger instinct spike. This level of background knowledge required serious research. "What do you want?" "To test a theory," Webb said, beginning to circle slowly around David. "You see, I've been studying competence. Real competence, not the fake credentials society hands out. Most people who call themselves outdoorsmen would be dead within hours if faced with a genuine challenge. But you're different." David matched Webb's movement, keeping distance constant. His spatial memory mapped every tree, every potential obstacle or advantage. "What kind of test?" "Survival against intelligence," Webb replied. "You have remarkable instincts, Mr. Sterling, natural abilities honed by experience. But I have something else, systematic knowledge of human psychology applied with methodical precision. I'm curious which proves superior." "And if I refuse to participate in your experiment?" Webb's smile finally faded. "You don't understand. The experiment began the moment you entered this forest. The question isn't whether you'll participate, it's whether you'll survive it." David felt pieces clicking together in his mind. The modified trail marker, the position tracks. "How long have you been planning this?" 3 weeks. Webb said with obvious pride. "Ever since I learned you'd be taking this specific trail. Your therapist, Dr. Reeves, is very talkative after the 3rd martini." The violation hit David like a physical blow. His private therapy sessions, his personal struggles, his carefully planned solitude, all of it had been turned into ammunition. "You're sick," David said quietly. "I'm evolved," Webb corrected. "Most people stumble through life never truly tested. They have no idea what they're capable of because they're never placed in situations that demand genuine capability. I provide that service. By stalking people in national parks, by creating controlled environments where natural selection can operate as intended." Webb's voice took on the tone of a professor giving a lecture. "Darwin understood that survival isn't random. It's based on adaptive advantages, but modern society prevents natural selection from functioning. I simply restore the process." David's investigative intuition was working overtime, analyzing Webb's words and behavior. This wasn't random violence. It was systematic. How many others? "You'd be number 7, Webb said casually, though the others weren't nearly as interesting as you promised to be. Most couldn't even recognize they were being hunted until it was far too late." "What happened to them?" Webb's expression became almost regretful. "They proved inadequate. Natural selection is rarely kind to the weak." He brightened again. "But you're different. Your abilities are genuine. This will be my first test against a truly worthy opponent." David realized with growing horror that he wasn't just facing a killer, he was facing a killer who respected him. Webb wasn't trying to simply eliminate him, he wanted to see if David could match his intelligence. "What makes you think I'll play along?" Webb gestured toward the trail behind David. "Because you don't have a choice. My associate has been covering your retreat for the past hour. And before you consider trying to overpower me physically, you should know I'm quite prepared for that possibility." David's eyes flicked briefly behind him. He hadn't heard anyone, but that didn't mean Webb was lying. His human presence detection had been focused forward. "Associate?" "Dr. Sarah Chen, former Army medic, expert tracker, and quite frankly, someone who makes me look like an amateur when it comes to outdoor skills. She's been very impressed with your abilities today." David's mind raced. 2 professionals coordinated with weeks of preparation. But Webb's need to explain, to have David understand and appreciate the complexity of his plan, that was a weakness. "You want me to admire your work," David said. Webb's eyes lit up. "Exactly. You see, most people can't appreciate the elegance of what I've created here. The psychological profiling to select appropriate subjects, the logistical planning to create controlled environments, the careful study of individual capabilities to design specific challenges. It's art, Mr. Sterling. Deadly art, but art nonetheless." "And what's my specific challenge?" Webb checked his watch. "Simple. Survive until dawn tomorrow. If you can evade both Dr. Chen and myself for 14 hours, I'll consider my hypothesis proven, and you'll be free to leave. If not," he shrugged. "And if I win?" "Then you'll have demonstrated that instinct and natural ability can triumph over systematic intelligence. A valuable data point." Webb's expression became serious. "Though I should warn you, I've never lost one of these contests." David looked around the forest with new eyes. Every tree was potential cover or trap. Every sound could be natural wildlife or approaching death. But Webb had made one critical error. He'd given David a time limit. 14 hours meant David didn't have to defeat them, just survive. And survival was something David Sterling knew better than almost anyone alive. "When does it start?" David asked. Webb smiled and stepped backward into the forest. "It already has." Direct confrontation. David had exactly 30 seconds before Webb disappeared into the forest, and he used every one of them. His spatial memory activated fully, creating a 3-dimensional map of his surroundings. Creek to the northwest, about 400 meters, ridgeline to the east, steep but climbable. Dense undergrowth to the south that would slow pursuit but also limit his own movement. The key was understanding his opponents. Webb was intelligent and methodical, but he was also proud. He wanted this to be a proper test, which meant he wouldn't use overwhelming advantages. The mention of Dr. Chen covering his retreat was likely psychological pressure. If she were really positioned behind him, Webb wouldn't have revealed it. David activated his most developed ability, investigative intuition combined with pattern recognition. Webb's behavior suggested someone who viewed this as a chess match, not a hunt. He would start with psychological pressure, then escalate to more direct challenges. The goal wasn't quick elimination, it was proving superior intelligence. That gave David his strategy. Instead of running, he sat down on a fallen log and pulled out his water bottle. Completely calm, taking time to hydrate. It was a message. I'm not prey, and I'm not impressed by your theatrics. Within 5 minutes, he heard movement in the undergrowth, not Webb. Too careless. Probably Dr. Chen, if she existed, testing his reactions. David didn't even look toward the sound. Instead, he pulled out his map and compass, studying them as if planning his route. Interesting choice. Webb's voice came from somewhere to his left, still hidden but closer than before. Most people would be running by now. Most people aren't former forest rangers, David replied without looking up from his map. And most people haven't spent years dealing with actual dangerous situations instead of manufactured ones. A pause. Then Webb stepped into view again, but this time his position was more tactical, behind a tree that provided cover while maintaining visual contact. You think this is manufactured? I think you're playing games, David said, finally looking up. Real predators don't announce themselves. They don't give speeches about their methodology. They don't provide countdown timers. He folded his map deliberately. You're not a killer, Dr. Webb. You're a frustrated academic with a God complex. Webb's smile faltered for the first time. 6 previous subjects would disagree with your assessment. 6 previous subjects weren't me. David stood up and shouldered his pack. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to walk to my planned campsite. I'm going to set up my tent and make dinner. If you want to continue your psychological experiment, you're welcome to try. But you should understand something. David activated his human presence detection, expanding his awareness to its fullest range. He could sense Webb's position, and now, yes, another presence about 200 meters behind and to the right. Dr. Chen was real. I've spent 7 years in these woods dealing with actual threats, lost hikers, injured climbers, aggressive wildlife, drug operations, illegal logging operations. You're not the first person who thought they could turn Olympic National Park into their personal playground. David began walking toward his planned route, but slowly, demonstrating he wasn't fleeing. The difference, he continued, is that real threats don't waste time with philosophical discussions. They act, which tells me you're not as confident as you pretend to be. Stop. Webb's voice had an edge now. David kept walking. Here's my counter-proposal, Dr. Webb. You and Dr. Chen pack up your little experiment and leave. I'll give you a 2-hour head start before I report this to the park rangers who are expecting my check-in call tomorrow. I said stop! David heard rapid movement behind him, Dr. Chen closing distance quickly. But David's spatial memory had been working the entire time he talked, and he'd noticed something Webb missed. They were approaching a creek junction where the terrain would limit movement options. David suddenly dropped and rolled left as Dr. Chen emerged from the undergrowth behind him. She was real and professional, military-bearing, tactical movement, rifle ready but not yet aimed. But David's movement had put the largest cedar tree between them. Dr. Chen, I presume, David called out. Army. Marines, came the reply, professional voice controlled. Dr. Webb, he's more capable than anticipated. I know. Webb's voice had lost its professorial tone. Mr. Sterling, you're making this more difficult than necessary. David was already moving. His natural orientation ability had plotted 3 potential escape routes, but more importantly, he'd realized something about his opponents. They were working together, but they weren't perfectly coordinated. Webb was the planner. Chen was the implementer, classic academic practitioner dynamic, which meant communication gaps. Difficult for who? David called back, now moving toward the creek. You're the ones who wanted a test of capabilities. He reached the creek and immediately understood why his instincts had led him here. The water was running fast and deep from recent rains, but there was a series of rocks that would allow crossing. More importantly, the sound of rushing water would mask his movements. David heard Webb and Chen communicating, but couldn't make out words over the creek noise. That was good. If he couldn't hear them, they were having the same problem. He crossed quickly, using rocks he'd mentally mapped. On the far side, David activated his most crucial ability. He began truly reading the forest around him. This was his territory now. 7 years of walking these specific woods had created a mental database of seasonal patterns, wildlife behavior, terrain features, weather signs. Webb and Chen might be professional, but they were visitors here. David found what he was looking for, a cluster of fallen trees that created natural concealment while offering multiple exit routes. He positioned himself with clear sightlines and settled in to wait. Within 10 minutes, he heard them approaching the creek. They were good, much quieter than average people would be. But David's trained ears could distinguish human movement from natural forest sounds. He crossed here, Chen's voice, much closer now. Obviously, Webb replied, and David heard frustration in his tone. But where would he go from there? David almost smiled. Webb was thinking like an academic, analyzing possibilities instead of reading immediate signs. Chen was the tracker, but she was following specific signs instead of understanding the broader pattern. North toward Ho Lake, Chen said. It's the logical destination. No, Webb said after a moment. He's not following logical progression anymore. We forced him to abandon his planned route. He's thinking tactically now. That was more accurate, David admitted silently. Webb was learning. So where? Chen asked. David waited. His next move would depend on what they decided. He's still close, Webb said finally. Mr. Sterling isn't running because he doesn't think he needs to. He's turned this into a counter-hunt. Silence for a long moment. Then Webb's voice, much louder, clearly intended for David to hear. You want to know why I became what I am, Mr. Sterling? You want to understand the motivation behind my experiments? David didn't respond, but his attention sharpened. Webb's psychological need to explain was reasserting itself. My wife and daughter died 3 years ago. Hiking accident in Yellowstone. They were with a guide service, professionally trained, or so they claimed. When the weather turned bad, the guides panicked, made elementary mistakes, led them into terrain that was completely inappropriate for conditions. Webb's voice was moving as he talked. He was using confession as a way to mask position changes. Sarah was 8 years old. She followed instructions perfectly, trusted the adults to keep her safe. Emma, my wife, had done her research, chosen the most highly rated guide service, taken every recommended precaution. David could hear genuine pain in Webb's voice now. This wasn't performance. This was the core trauma driving everything. They died because incompetent people were allowed to operate in environments where incompetence kills. The guide service faced no real consequences. A small, fine, temporary suspension of permits. Back in business within 6 months. Webb was getting closer. David could track his movement by voice, but Chen had gone silent. She was flanking. That's when I understood that society's safety nets prevent natural selection from eliminating dangerous incompetence. People like those guides continue to exist, continue to threaten others because they're never truly tested. So you became judge and jury, David said, finally responding but immediately moving after speaking. I became an instrument of correction, Webb replied. I create situations where incompetence reveals itself and competence proves itself. You, Mr. Sterling, are proving yourself admirably. David was now in position to see both Webb and Chen. They'd formed a classic pincer movement, but they'd made an error. They were focused on where his voice had come from, not where he'd moved to. Here's what I think, Dr. Webb, David said from his new position. I think you couldn't save your family, so now you're playing God to make yourself feel better about that failure. The reaction was immediate. Webb stepped into the open, visibly angry for the first time. Don't you dare! David was already moving, not away, but directly toward Webb. It was exactly the opposite of what anyone would expect, which gave him 3 seconds of complete surprise. 3 seconds was enough. David tackled Webb around the waist, driving him backward into a tree. Webb was strong and fit, but David had spent years dealing with panicked hikers and aggressive wildlife. He knew how to use leverage and momentum. "Chen!" Webb shouted, struggling. David heard Chen moving, but she couldn't get a clear shot with Webb in the way. That had been the calculation, turn their coordination into a liability. "Here's my psychological assessment, Doctor," David said, controlling Webb's arms. "You're not a predator. You're a victim who's trying to process trauma by creating a fantasy where you have control. But control is an illusion in the wilderness. Ask any real outdoorsman." David released Webb suddenly and rolled away as Chen approached. But instead of running, he stood his ground. "Dr. Chen, how many of Webb's subjects did you actually see him kill?" Chen stopped, rifle raised but not aimed. "What?" "Simple question. How many people have you watched, Doctor?" "Webb actually kill." A pause. "That's not... The experiment isn't about killing, it's about testing." David saw the crack he'd been hoping for. "What happens to the people who fail his tests?" We... Chen looked toward Webb, who was getting to his feet. "She doesn't know," David said to Webb. "You've been lying to her too." Webb straightened, his academic composure returning. "Dr. Chen understands the necessity of our work." "Do you, Dr. Chen?" David asked. "Have you seen the bodies? The graves? Or has Dr. Webb been telling you they failed and were eliminated while you were positioned elsewhere?" Chen's weapon lowered slightly. "Marcus!" David saw his opening and took it. "There have been no previous subjects, have there, Dr. Webb? This is your first attempt at actually carrying out your fantasy. Dr. Chen thinks she's helping with a psychological study, not participating in murder." The silence stretched for several seconds. Then Webb began to laugh. "Very good, Mr. Sterling. Exceptional, actually. You've identified the fundamental flaw in my methodology." Webb's smile returned, but it was different now, more genuine, less controlled. "You're absolutely correct. Dr. Chen believes she's participating in an elaborate but non-lethal psychological experiment. I've been building up to the actual implementation." Chen stepped backward. "Marcus, what is he talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that Dr. Webb has been planning to kill me," David said. "And probably you, Dr. Chen, once you served your purpose. You're a witness, after all." Webb pulled a pistol from inside his jacket. "Now you're both correct and incorrect, Mr. Sterling. Correct about my intentions regarding you. Incorrect about Dr. Chen." He aimed the weapon at David. "She's not a witness. She's a final test." Webb turned to Chen. "Dr. Chen, you have a choice. Kill Mr. Sterling, or I kill both of you. This has always been the real experiment. Not testing survival skills, but testing the boundaries of moral compromise under extreme pressure." David saw Chen's face go pale. "Marcus, this is insane." "This is evolution," Webb corrected. "Dr. Chen, you have 30 seconds to decide. Will you sacrifice one person to save yourself, or will you maintain your moral principles and die for them?" David realized with crystal clarity that Webb had just made his fatal error. His compulsion to create elaborate psychological scenarios had led him to a situation he couldn't control. "Dr. Chen," David said quietly, "there's a third option." Resolution. David's spatial memory had been working the entire time, mapping not just terrain, but angles, distances, cover points. Webb was holding the pistol in a classic civilian grip, competent but not professional. Chen still had her rifle, but it was lowered, her tactical training warring with psychological shock. Most importantly, Webb had positioned himself badly. His need to maintain visual contact with both David and Chen had put him in the open, while David was still partially concealed by fallen timber. "Third option?" Webb asked, genuinely curious despite holding a weapon on him. "The option where your psychological experiment becomes a case study in its own failure," David replied. "Doctor, Chen, How long have you been working with Webb? 6 months, Chen answered automatically, still processing the revelation. And in 6 months, did you ever see him actually demonstrate the survival skills he claims to be testing? Webb's expression shifted slightly. That's irrelevant. It's completely relevant, David interrupted. Dr. Chen, I'm betting Webb recruited you specifically because you have the practical skills he lacks. He's the theorist. You're the implementer. But what if the theorist doesn't actually understand what he's theorizing about? David activated his investigative intuition one final time, but now focused on Webb himself. Academic build, soft hands, despite expensive outdoor gear, slight breathing difficulty from the brief physical confrontation earlier. Webb wasn't a woodsman, he was a suburban academic playing dress-up. Dr. Webb, when's the last time you spent a night alone in the wilderness? Webb's grip on the pistol tightened. This isn't about my experience. It's about everything about your experience, David said. You've created an elaborate fantasy based on theoretical knowledge, but you've never actually tested yourself against the environment you claim others are inadequate for. David slowly reached into his jacket. Webb tensed, but David pulled out a compass. Simple question, Doctor. Which direction is north? Webb glanced around, clearly calculating based on visible landmarks. Don't think about it, David said. Just point. After all, this is supposed to be a test of natural capabilities versus systematic knowledge. Webb pointed northeast. He was off by almost 40 degrees. Dr. Chen? David asked. Chen pointed northwest without hesitation. Exactly correct. Interesting, David said. Dr. Chen, what's the temperature right now? 42 degrees Fahrenheit, Chen replied immediately. Dr. Webb? Webb hesitated. That's not relevant to... It's completely relevant. You're testing people on capabilities you don't possess yourself. You've never developed the instincts you claim to be evaluating. David took a step forward. Webb raised the pistol, but his hand was shaking slightly. Here's what actually happened, Dr. Chen. Dr. Webb suffered a traumatic loss and developed a fantasy about creating order in a chaotic world. He researched his targets, planned his scenarios, recruited you to provide actual wilderness skills he lacks, but he never intended to actually go through with killing anyone. That's not, Webb started. Because you can't, David interrupted. You're not a killer, Dr. Webb. You're a grieving father who created an elaborate psychological theater to avoid dealing with the fact that sometimes bad things just happen. No amount of testing or selecting or proving competence will bring back your wife and daughter. Webb's weapon hand was shaking more now. They died because of incompetence. They died because of weather, David said gently, because mountain conditions can change faster than anyone can react. Because even competent people sometimes get caught in situations beyond their control. It wasn't anyone's fault, Dr. Webb. It was just tragedy. David could see Webb's psychological structure collapsing in real time. The elaborate rationalization that had sustained his fantasy was crumbling under direct confrontation with reality. Dr. Chen, David said without taking his eyes off Webb, how much of this operation was your actual planning versus Dr. Webb's theoretical framework? Almost all of it, Chen admitted quietly. Marcus provided profiles and psychology, but all the practical implementation, the tracking, the positioning, the equipment, because Dr. Webb couldn't do it himself, David said, just like he can't actually pull that trigger. Webb's weapon was shaking badly now. You don't understand. I understand perfectly, David said. You created a test you hoped to fail. You wanted someone to prove that competence and instinct could overcome systematic planning. Because if I could beat your system, it would mean your wife and daughter could have beaten the situation that killed them. It would mean their deaths weren't inevitable. Webb's face crumpled. The weapon lowered as tears started flowing. But Dr. Webb, David continued, stepping closer. Surviving your test wouldn't prove anything about what happened to your family. Different situation, different variables, different outcome. Their deaths weren't a referendum on human capability. They were just a terrible accident. Webb dropped the pistol. David immediately picked it up and handed it to Chen, who secured it with professional efficiency. "What happens now?" Chen asked. David looked at both of them. Webb was sitting on the ground, sobbing. Chen was clearly struggling with her own role in events. "Now we get Dr. Webb the help he actually needs," David said. "And Chen, you have some decisions to make about how much you want law enforcement to know about your participation. Will you report this?" David considered. Webb was broken, not dangerous. Chen had been manipulated, not malicious. And David's own understanding of trauma made him sympathetic to how grief could twist someone's thinking. "I'm going to report that I encountered 2 people in distress and helped them get back to safety," David said finally. "What Dr. Webb does about getting professional help is up to him, but this ends here." 3 hours later, David sat by his campfire, alone again. Webb and Chen had left together, Webb leaning heavily on Chen's arm. David had watched them disappear down the trail, then had continued to his planned campsite. The forest was quiet again, but it was natural quiet now. Night sounds of small animals, distant owl calls, the constant murmur of water over stones. David felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 years. Complete presence in the moment. Dr. Reeves had been right. He'd needed to reconnect with what brought him to the wilderness in the first place. But it wasn't just about using his old skills. It was about understanding that competence didn't mean controlling every variable. It meant adapting to whatever variables you encountered. Webb had tried to create a controlled environment where his pain could be processed through other people's suffering. But the wilderness didn't work that way. It was always larger than any individual's ability to control it. That was its power and its teaching. David pulled out his satellite communicator and sent a brief message to his emergency contact. "All well, as planned, Sterling." Tomorrow he would hike out, return to Seattle, and probably never see Webb or Chen again. But something had changed during his encounter with them. He'd rediscovered not just his forest skills, but his understanding of why those skills mattered. They weren't about dominating the environment or proving superiority over other people. They were about finding balance with nature, with other humans, with the unpredictable variables that made life both dangerous and beautiful. David banked his fire and settled into his sleeping bag. Above him, stars were visible through breaks in the forest canopy. Real stars, not the psychological constructs Webb had tried to navigate by. In the morning, he would return to his consulting work. But now he knew he wouldn't just be reviewing safety protocols and analyzing environmental impacts. He would be helping people understand that true safety came not from eliminating all risks, but from developing the capabilities to handle whatever risks emerged. Some tests couldn't be manufactured. The real ones came when you weren't expecting them, from directions you hadn't anticipated, requiring resources you didn't know you possessed. David Sterling had passed a test today, but more importantly, he'd helped 2 other people understand that not all tests were meant to be won. Some were meant to teach you how to live with what couldn't be controlled. The forest settled into its ancient rhythms around him, and for the first time in 3 years, David slept without dreams of failure. Marcus Reed checked his gear for the 3rd time, muscle memory from 6 years as a park ranger, still dictating his morning routine. The Garmin GPS clipped to his belt, backup compass in the left cargo pocket, emergency beacon in the right. Water bottles filled, energy bars counted, first aid kit inventoried. The ritual felt different now, though. This wasn't work anymore. The October air in Olympic National Park carried that particular bite that meant winter was coming early this year. Marcus pulled his fleece tighter as he studied the map spread across the hood of his truck. The Hoh River Trail stretched ahead of him, a familiar ribbon of dirt and roots that he'd hiked countless times during his ranger days. Now, 3 months after resigning his position and 6 weeks since Sarah's funeral, he was returning to the forest that had once been his world. His phone buzzed. A text from his supervisor at the Wilderness Survival Company where he now worked. "Take all the time you need, Marcus. The mountains will wait." Good man, Peterson. He understood what the forest meant to people like them. Marcus folded the map and checked his watch. 7:15 a.m. Sunrise had been late, filtered through the thick canopy of Sitka spruce and western hemlock that made the Olympic Peninsula feel like another world. He shouldered his pack, lighter than his old ranger kit, but still carrying everything he'd need for a day hike to the thermal pools and back. Maybe 2 days if he decided to camp at Elk Lake like he and Sarah had planned to do. The trailhead was empty except for a single car with Oregon plates, early hikers probably, the kind who liked to catch sunrise from the river overlook. Marcus signed the trail register, old habits, and noted the previous entry. Thompson family, party of 3, destination Thermal Springs, return Sunday. Yesterday's date. The handwriting was neat, careful. A father taking his family on what was probably their first backcountry adventure. Marcus started up the trail, his boots finding the familiar rhythm against packed earth and fallen needles. Within 50 yards, the sounds of civilization disappeared, replaced by the white noise of the Hoh River running high from recent rains. This was what he'd needed, the silence that wasn't really silent, filled with the small sounds of a forest waking up. 20 minutes in, he stopped. Something was off. It took him a moment to identify what his subconscious had already flagged. The birds. There should be more of them at this hour. More activity. The forest felt too quiet, like animals had fled from something. Marcus stood still, listening, extending his senses the way he'd learned to do during those early ranger years when reading the forest could mean the difference between finding a lost hiker alive or finding them at all. A branch snapped somewhere to his left, too loud and too deliberate for a deer. Marcus turned toward the sound, but saw nothing except the typical understory of ferns and fallen logs. Still, the feeling persisted. After 6 years of backcountry work, he'd learned to trust his instincts about these things. He continued up the trail, but more carefully now, his attention divided between the path ahead and the forest around him. Another quarter-mile brought him to the first creek crossing, where wooden planks bridged a narrow stream that fed into the Hoh. This was where he saw the first real sign that something was wrong. Footprints in the mud beside the bridge. Recent ones, maybe from yesterday evening, based on how the edges had dried. 3 sets, large hiking boots, smaller hiking boots, and tiny sneakers with a distinctive tread pattern. The Thompson family from the trail register. But the prints bothered him for reasons he couldn't immediately articulate. Marcus knelt beside the clearest impression, the large boot print, probably the father's. Size 11, aggressive tread, expensive. The kind of boot someone bought for serious hiking. But the depth was wrong. Too light for someone carrying an overnight pack, and the stride length suggested someone moving slowly, carefully, not with the confident pace you'd expect from an experienced hiker wearing gear like that. He studied the smaller prints. The woman's boots were quality too, but again, the impressions seemed too shallow, like they weren't carrying much weight. The child's sneakers told a different story, deep impressions, scuffed marks suggesting fatigue or stumbling. A kid getting tired while the adults somehow weren't. Marcus pulled out his phone and took photos of the prints, then continued across the bridge. On the far side, he found something that made him stop cold. A single boot print in perfect detail, pressed into a patch of soft earth beside the trail. Size 11, same tread as the father's tracks. But this print was deep, the full weight impression of someone carrying a heavy pack, and it was pointing back toward the trailhead. Marcus crouched, studying the print more carefully. The edges were sharp, recent, maybe from this morning early, but that made no sense. According to the trail register, the Thompson family had headed up yesterday and planned to return today. Why would the father have been walking back toward the parking area alone and carrying weight in the early morning hours? He photographed the print and stood, scanning the forest around him. The feeling of being watched had returned, stronger now. Marcus had spent enough time alone in the wilderness to know the difference between paranoia and genuine danger. This was the latter. Moving more cautiously, he continued up the trail. The next mile brought him deeper into the old-growth section, where trees, older than European civilization, cast the forest floor into perpetual twilight. Here, the trail became more technical, winding between massive Douglas firs and over root systems that could trip the unwary. It was here that Marcus found the first piece of equipment, a child's pink water bottle lying just off the trail beside a fallen log, clean, undamaged, still half full. Marcus approached it carefully, noting that it lay at an odd angle, as if it had been placed rather than dropped. A child would have to have been incredibly careless to lose her water bottle and not notice, especially one who was already showing signs of fatigue based on her footprints. Marcus photographed the bottle from multiple angles before picking it up. No mud, no scratches, no signs that it had been lying on the forest floor for long. The water inside was clear and clean. On the bottom, written in black marker, Katie Thompson, age 8, Portland, OR, and a phone number. Something cold settled in Marcus's stomach. In 6 years of ranger work, he'd seen enough search and rescue operations to recognize the signs. Equipment abandoned in unlikely places. Tracks that didn't match the situation. The feeling that someone was watching from the tree line, but this felt different, more deliberate, like pieces of a puzzle being revealed one at a time. Marcus clipped the water bottle to his pack and pulled out his GPS unit to mark the location. The screen showed his position accurately, but when he tried to activate the emergency beacon function, nothing happened. The unit powered on fine, showed satellites, but the distress signal wouldn't engage. He tried his cell phone. No bars, which was normal this deep in the park, but the emergency call function, which usually worked even without regular service, showed no emergency service available. That definitely wasn't normal. Marcus felt the first real prickle of alarm. In all his years working these trails, he'd never seen a complete communication failure. Even in the deepest wilderness, emergency systems had backup protocols. He continued up the trail, every sense now hyper-alert. The forest remained too quiet, the bird activity still suppressed. Whatever had spooked the wildlife was still out there. 2 miles from the creek crossing, Marcus found the second piece of equipment, a high-end hiking boot, women's size 7, lying beside the trail in plain sight, one of the pair that had made the light prints back at the creek. The boot was clean, the laces still tied, as if it had been removed carefully and placed for someone to find. Marcus stared at the boot for a long moment, his mind working through the implications. No hiker removed their boots on the trail unless something was seriously wrong. And if Mrs. Thompson had injured her foot badly enough to abandon footwear, there would be blood, torn fabric, some sign of distress. This boot looked like it had been taken off in the comfort of someone's living room. The placement bothered him even more than the condition. Sitting upright beside the trail, positioned perfectly for maximum visibility. Someone wanted it to be found. Marcus photographed the boot and marked the GPS coordinates, then spent 10 minutes searching the area around it. No other signs of disturbance. No blood, no torn clothing, no indication that anyone had left the established trail. Just the boot, placed like a breadcrumb in a fairy tale. The fairy tale comparison made him think of something else. Stories where breadcrumbs were meant to lead someone deeper into the forest, away from safety. Marcus had never believed in coincidences during his ranger years, and he wasn't about to start now. He pulled out his map and marked the locations where he'd found the water bottle and boot. If this pattern continued, if more items appeared at regular intervals along the trail, then someone was definitely laying out a trail of evidence. The question was whether that someone was a member of the Thompson family trying to leave signs for rescuers, or someone else entirely. The answer came 3 miles further up the trail. Marcus rounded a bend and stopped dead. There, hanging from a branch at exactly eye level, was a man's hiking boot, not dropped, not lost, hung deliberately with a piece of paracord looped around the ankle cuff. The boot swayed slightly in the mountain breeze, a pendulum marking time in the silent forest. This wasn't a distress signal. This was a message, and the message was clear. Someone knew Marcus was following the trail, and they wanted him to understand that the Thompson family hadn't lost their equipment. It had been taken from them. Marcus felt his old ranger training kick into full gear. This was no longer a day hike to process grief. This was a crime scene stretching across miles of wilderness, and he was walking deeper into it with every step. He photographed the hanging boot from multiple angles, then carefully cut it down with his pocket knife, preserving the paracord. The boot matched the prints from the creek crossing, size 11, expensive, barely worn. But like the others, it was too clean, too undamaged for equipment that had supposedly been in the forest overnight. Marcus checked his gear again, this time with different priorities. His knife, his compass, the emergency whistle that might work even if electronic devices didn't. He still had 6 hours of daylight, maybe 7. Enough time to reach the thermal springs and backtrack if necessary. But as he looked up the trail, winding deeper into the old-growth section where trees blocked out most of the sky, Marcus realized he was facing a choice. Turn back now and report what he'd found to the authorities, or continue following a trail of evidence that someone clearly wanted him to follow. The smart move was to retreat. Call in a search and rescue team. Let professionals handle what was obviously a dangerous situation. But Marcus thought about the trail register, a family of 3, including an 8-year-old girl. If they were still alive, if there was any chance of finding them before nightfall, then every hour mattered. And there was something else, something that made the decision for him. In 6 years of ranger work, Marcus had developed what his colleagues called supernatural instincts for reading the forest. Right now, those instincts were telling him that whoever had staged this elaborate trail of clues was still out there, still watching, which meant the situation was active, ongoing. The Thompson family might still be alive. Marcus shouldered his pack and continued up the trail, but with every sense now focused on survival rather than hiking. Someone had turned Olympic National Park into a hunting ground, and he was walking deeper into their territory with every step. The boot, swaying from its branch, fell behind him, but Marcus could feel eyes tracking his movement through the forest. Somewhere ahead lay either the Thompson family or the person who had taken them. He intended to find out which. The trail climbed steadily for the next hour, winding through groves of ancient cedar and across several more creek crossings. Marcus found no more equipment, but he did find something else. Signs that multiple people had passed this way recently, and not all of them willingly. At the 4th creek crossing, Marcus knelt beside the water and studied the bank carefully. Here, away from the main trail, the mud held clearer impressions. He could see the same 3 sets of tracks from earlier, the Thompson family, but now they were accompanied by something new. Boot prints, size 10, with a tread pattern Marcus didn't recognize. Military-style, deep lugs, professional quality. More importantly, these prints showed a different gait, a confident stride that spoke of someone comfortable in the wilderness, someone who knew exactly where he was going. The positioning of the tracks told a story. The Thompson family's prints showed signs of hesitation, clustering around the creek edge as if they'd been uncertain about crossing. The size 10 boots showed no such hesitation. They moved straight across, with the steady pace of someone in complete control. Marcus followed the tracks across the creek and found what he was looking for on the far bank. A clear boot print in soft earth with the distinctive tread pattern visible in perfect detail. But it was the placement that made his blood run cold. The print was positioned directly over one of the child's sneaker impressions, as if someone had deliberately stepped on Katie Thompson's track. Not by accident. This was intentional. A message as clear as the boot hanging from the branch. Someone wanted Marcus to understand that they had taken control of the Thompson family. Marcus photographed the overlapped prints and checked his GPS. 4 miles from the trailhead, still 3 miles from the thermal springs. If the Thompson family was being held somewhere ahead, the kidnapper had chosen his location well, deep enough in the wilderness to be isolated, but accessible enough to move captives without extreme difficulty. The question was, why? Random kidnappings didn't happen in national parks, especially not with the elaborate staging Marcus had been following. This felt personal, targeted. But targeted at whom? The Thompson family or someone else? As if in answer to his question, Marcus heard something that made him freeze, the distant sound of someone whistling, a tune he almost recognized, carried on the mountain air from somewhere ahead on the trail. Marcus moved off the path, using the cover of a massive cedar to shield his approach. The whistling continued, casual and unhurried, coming from the direction of a small clearing visible through the trees. As he got closer, Marcus could make out the melody. "Whistle While You Work," the old Disney tune, sung slightly off-key but with obvious enjoyment. Someone was enjoying themselves, in the middle of what appeared to be a kidnapping. Marcus crept closer, using skills learned during his ranger training for approaching wildlife without disturbance. 20 yards from the clearing, he could see through the undergrowth to where someone had set up what looked like a temporary camp. A man sat on a fallen log, his back to Marcus, wearing expensive hiking gear and military-style boots. Size 10, Marcus noted automatically. The man was methodically cleaning what appeared to be camping equipment, organizing items into precise rows on a tarp spread across the forest floor. But it was the equipment itself that made Marcus's blood freeze. Sleeping bags still in their stuff sacks, a camp stove still in its box, a water filtration system with the tag still attached. All of it expensive, all of it brand new, all of it suggesting that someone had come prepared for an extended stay in the wilderness. The man finished whistling and spoke without turning around. "You're earlier than I calculated, Mr. Reed. I estimated another 30 minutes based on your pace through the lower sections." Marcus felt like ice water had replaced his blood. The man knew his name, had been tracking his progress. This wasn't a chance encounter. It was an appointment. "You can come out now," the man continued conversationally. "We both know you're going to, and frankly, hiding in the bushes seems beneath someone with your reputation." Marcus considered his options. Retreat, try to circle around, or step into the clearing and face whatever was waiting for him. But the man's tone suggested that running wasn't really an option. If he knew Marcus's name and had been tracking his progress, he'd probably prepared for multiple contingencies. Marcus stepped out from behind the cedar, his hands visible but ready. "Where's the Thompson family?" The man turned around, and Marcus got his first look at his opponent. Mid-40s, lean build, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Clean-shaven, hair neat despite 2 days in the forest. He looked more like a college professor than a kidnapper, which somehow made him more unsettling. "Safe," the man said simply. "For now, please sit down. We have quite a bit to discuss, and I find these conversations go better when everyone is comfortable. I'll stand." The man smiled. "I expected you would. Very well. My name is Thomas Kieran, Dr. Thomas Kieran, formerly of the Army Research Command's Behavioral Sciences Division. And you, of course, are Marcus Reed, former park ranger, current wilderness survival instructor, recently widowed, struggling with purpose and meaning in the wake of personal tragedy." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. "How do you know all that?" Research, Mr. Reed. I've been following your career for some time. 6 years with the National Park Service, outstanding record, specialty in search and rescue operations. You found people others couldn't find, saw patterns others missed. You had what your colleagues called supernatural instincts for reading the forest. Dr. Kieran gestured to the equipment spread around him. I've always been interested in exceptional individuals, people who operate beyond normal human parameters. Your reputation suggested you might be exactly the type of person I'd been looking for. Looking for why? To test a theory, Kieran said calmly. You see, I've spent the last 15 years studying human behavioral patterns under extreme stress. How people react when their normal social supports are stripped away, when they're forced to rely entirely on their own resources. Most break down quite predictably, but occasionally you find someone truly exceptional. Marcus realized he was dealing with something far worse than a simple kidnapper. You're running experiments, using the Thompson family. Among others, yes, though experiments makes it sound rather clinical. I prefer to think of it as natural selection in action. Survival of the fittest, played out in the one environment where human adaptations actually matter. Doctor, Kieran stood and began pacing, his movements controlled and precise. You see, Mr. Reed, I believe our modern world has made us soft, complacent. We've lost touch with the fundamental struggle that shaped our species for millennia. Most people today couldn't survive a week in real wilderness, but our ancestors lived their entire lives on the edge of death. So you decided to fix that by kidnapping families. I decided to study what happens when people are returned to their natural environment, stripped of technology and social support. Most fail, of course. Natural selection is inherently wasteful. But occasionally, someone demonstrates truly exceptional capabilities. Kieran stopped pacing and looked directly at Marcus. Someone like you, for instance. Did you know you've covered 4 miles of difficult terrain in just over 2 hours, while simultaneously conducting a detailed forensic analysis of multiple crime scenes? Most people would have missed half the evidence you catalogued, and those who did notice would have immediately retreated to seek help. Marcus felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. You wanted me to follow the trail, the equipment, the spacing. You designed it specifically for me. Of course, I've been studying your case files for months, analyzing your search and rescue methodologies. You have remarkable pattern recognition abilities, Mr. Reed. Almost preternatural. I wanted to see how you'd perform when the stakes were truly personal. Personal? Dr. Kieran smiled, but there was no warmth in it. The Thompson family are alive and unharmed, Mr. Reed. For now. But their continued well-being depends entirely on your performance over the next few hours. You see, I've designed what you might call a final examination, a test of whether your abilities are truly exceptional or merely well-trained. Marcus realized he was dealing with someone completely detached from normal human morality. You're insane. I'm thorough, Kieran corrected. 15 years of research has taught me that true human potential only emerges under conditions of genuine threat. Remove the safety net, strip away the illusions of civilization, and you discover what people are really made of. What do you want from me? I want you to play the game, Mr. Reed. I've created a scenario that will test every one of your exceptional abilities. Your tracking skills, your ability to read environmental cues, your spatial memory, your intuitive understanding of human behavior. Complete the challenges I've prepared, and the Thompson family goes free. Fail and, well, natural selection takes its course. Marcus felt anger building alongside the fear. You're talking about murdering innocent people. I'm talking about evolution in action. The Thompson family knew the risks when they entered the wilderness. They chose to venture into an environment where human technology provides no advantage. If they can't adapt, if they can't find a way to survive, then perhaps they don't deserve to. Doctor, Kieran walked over to a tree where Marcus now noticed a large hiking pack was hanging from a branch. But you, Mr. Reed, you're different. You've already proven that you can read the forest like a book, that you can see patterns invisible to others. The question is whether you can do it under pressure, with lives hanging in the balance. Where are they? Close. Very close. In fact, if you were to use that remarkable spatial memory of yours, you might realize that we're currently standing in a location you visited before, several years ago, if I'm not mistaken. Marcus looked around the clearing again, this time with different eyes. The fallen log, the creek in the distance, the distinctive rock formation visible through the trees. Recognition hit him like a physical blow. "The Morrison search," he said quietly. "Excellent. Yes, this is exactly where you found the remains of James Morrison, the solo hiker who disappeared in 2019. Took you 3 days to locate him, if I recall correctly. The official report said you followed a hunch about water sources, but I suspect it was more than that. You remembered something about this specific location, something that drew you here." Marcus did remember. Morrison had been found at the base of a hidden ravine, a geological feature invisible from the main trail, but accessible through a gap in the rock formation. Marcus had found him by following subtle changes in vegetation that suggested underground water, combined with an intuitive sense that Morrison would have sought shelter in exactly this type of location. "The ravine," Marcus said. "The ravine," Kieran confirmed, "where the Thompson family is currently waiting for you to demonstrate whether your reputation is deserved. They have food, water, basic shelter, but their situation is temporary. You have until sunset to locate them and solve the additional challenges I've prepared." "What additional challenges?" Dr. Kieran opened his pack and pulled out a device Marcus didn't recognize, some kind of electronic tablet with a ruggedized case. "I've spent considerable time learning about your methods, Mr. Reed. Your ability to navigate without instruments, your talent for finding hidden water sources, your almost supernatural sense for dangerous terrain. I've designed a series of tests that will push each of those abilities to their limits." He handed Marcus the tablet. "GPS coordinates for 5 locations within a 1-mile radius of here. At each location, you'll find evidence and instructions for the next phase. Complete all 5 challenges before sunset, and you'll receive the exact coordinates for the Thompson family's location." Marcus looked at the tablet screen, which showed a topographical map with 5 red dots marked at various points around the clearing. The terrain was difficult: steep ravines, dense forest, at least 2 creek crossings that would be treacherous in current conditions. "Why?" Marcus asked. "What's the point of all this?" Dr. Kieran's expression grew distant. "When I was 8 years old, Mr. Reed, my family took a camping trip to Yellowstone. I wandered away from the campsite and spent 6 days alone in the wilderness before search teams found me. 6 days of terror, hunger, cold, genuine fear for my life." His voice took on a different quality, more personal. "But something remarkable happened during those 6 days. I discovered capabilities I never knew I possessed. I learned to read animal behavior for signs of water, to recognize edible plants, to build shelter from materials the forest provided. I became something more than I had been." "So you decided everyone should have the same experience?" "I decided that modern civilization has robbed us of our birthright. We've traded evolutionary pressure for comfort, and in doing so, we've stopped growing as a species. Most people will never discover what they're truly capable of because they'll never face genuine adversity." Kieran gestured toward the forest around them. "Out here, technology fails, social structures collapse, and people are forced to rely on their fundamental capabilities. Some discover they have none, but others transcend their limitations and become something extraordinary." Marcus realized he was listening to someone who had constructed an elaborate philosophical justification for psychopathic behavior. "You're torturing people." I'm offering them the opportunity to evolve. Most decline, of course. Natural selection is notoriously inefficient, but occasionally someone like you comes along, someone who already demonstrates exceptional capabilities, someone who might be able to complete the full transformation. Into what? Into what humans could be if we hadn't allowed civilization to make us weak. You've already shown remarkable abilities, Mr. Reed. Your tracking skills, your intuitive understanding of natural systems, your ability to navigate complex terrain without instruments. But I suspect you're capable of much more. Dr. Kieran checked his watch. It's now 1:15 p.m. Sunset is at 6:23. You have just over 5 hours to complete 5 challenges and rescue the Thompson family. Each challenge is designed to test a different aspect of your capabilities. Fail any one of them, and the coordinates become useless. Marcus looked at the tablet again. The red dots were positioned in locations that would require serious hiking, potentially dangerous terrain navigation, and precise timing. What happens if I just walk away, report this to the authorities? Then the Thompson family dies, and I disappear back into 3 million acres of Olympic Peninsula wilderness. I've been planning this for 2 years, Mr. Reed. I have supply caches, alternate routes, contingency plans you haven't even imagined. By the time search teams could organize and deploy, I'll be long gone. But if I play your game, if you complete the challenges, the Thompson family goes free, and you'll have proven something remarkable about human potential. You'll have demonstrated that exceptional individuals can function beyond normal parameters when properly motivated. Marcus felt trapped between impossible choices. Walking away meant condemning 3 innocent people to death. But playing Kieran's game meant validating his twisted philosophy and potentially encouraging future attacks. Time is passing, Mr. Reed. The first challenge is located 0.3 miles northwest of here, near the old Ranger Station Foundation. I suggest you begin soon if you intend to complete all 5 before dark. Marcus looked at the tablet one more time, memorizing the locations of the red dots. 5 challenges scattered across difficult terrain, with the lives of a family hanging in the balance. But as he studied the positions, he began to see patterns. The spacing was deliberate, the sequence logical, each location building on the previous one. Dr. Kieran had designed this as more than a test. It was a puzzle, one that required not just physical capability, but intellectual analysis. Each challenge would provide information needed for the next, creating a cascading series of problems that could only be solved in sequence. One more thing, Kieran said as Marcus prepared to leave. You should know that I've been observing your capabilities for some time now. Your reputation for finding missing persons, your success rate in search and rescue operations, your ability to navigate terrain that defeats other professionals. I genuinely believe you might be capable of completing this trial. And if I am, then you'll have proven that human evolution didn't stop when we invented agriculture. You'll have demonstrated that exceptional individuals can transcend normal limitations when faced with genuine necessity. It would be scientifically significant. Marcus realized that Dr. Kieran genuinely believed in his twisted research. This wasn't just sadism, it was ideology, which made it infinitely more dangerous. I'll find them, Marcus said quietly. I believe you will. The question is whether you'll do it in time, and whether you'll learn something about yourself in the process. Marcus turned and walked toward the forest, leaving Dr. Kieran alone in the clearing with his equipment and his delusions. But as he disappeared into the trees, Marcus could hear the man begin whistling again. The same Disney tune, cheerful and incongruous in the growing darkness of the Olympic Peninsula wilderness. The hunt was beginning. Marcus found the first challenge site exactly where the GPS coordinates indicated, a small clearing marked by the stone foundation of an old ranger station built sometime in the 1930s and abandoned decades ago. But as he approached the location, Marcus realized that Dr. Kieran had chosen this spot for reasons beyond simple convenience. This was where Marcus had conducted his first successful search and rescue operation as a rookie ranger. A lost day hiker, disoriented and dehydrated, found after 36 hours by following subtle signs that more experienced rangers had missed. Marcus had used his spatial memory to recognize that the missing hiker would have been drawn to this exact location, high ground with a clear view, near water, with the psychological comfort of human structures, even if they were ruins. Dr. Kieran was demonstrating that his research had been thorough. He knew not just Marcus's professional history, but the specific details that had shaped his development as a tracker. On the stone foundation, Marcus found a waterproof case containing a handwritten note and what appeared to be a piece of fabric. The note was brief. Track the source. Time 2008. Distance 0.7 miles. Direction memory. The fabric was a small square of cotton, faded blue with a distinctive pattern, stripes with small anchors. Marcus recognized it immediately. It was a piece of the shirt worn by Tommy Chen, an 8-year-old who had wandered away from his family's campsite in 2008. Marcus had found Tommy after a 12-hour search, following tracks that led to a hidden creek bed nearly a mile from where anyone thought to look. But that had been 13 years ago, in a different section of the park entirely. Dr. Kieran was asking Marcus to remember not just the location, but the specific reasoning that had led him to find Tommy Chen. The source wasn't a water source. It was the source of Marcus's tracking methodology, the foundational case that had taught him to trust his instincts about how lost children behave in wilderness settings. Marcus closed his eyes and forced himself to remember. Tommy had been found near a creek, but not because he was thirsty. He'd been following what he thought was a trail, a game path that meandered through the forest, following natural contours. Children didn't navigate like adults. They followed their curiosity rather than logic. Direction, memory. Marcus opened his eyes and looked around the clearing, trying to see it as an 8-year-old would have 13 years ago. Not as a destination, but as a waypoint along a path that seemed to lead somewhere interesting. There, a gap in the trees on the eastern side of the foundation, where deer had worn a faint trail over decades of use. To an adult, it would be barely visible. To a curious child, it would look like an adventure waiting to happen. Marcus checked his compass and started following the game trail, but with his attention focused on reading the terrain the way Tommy Chen would have. Not looking for water or shelter, but for whatever might seem interesting or fun to explore. The trail wound through dense forest for nearly half a mile before opening into a small meadow where a creek made a sharp bend around a massive boulder. And there, tucked into a crevice in the rock, Marcus found the second waterproof case. This note was longer. Excellent. Time advantage, 23 minutes ahead of estimate. You're beginning to understand the nature of the test. Next challenge requires botanical knowledge, plus altitude awareness. Coordinates, 47.234N, 123.9156W. Elevation change, plus 400 feet. Flora indicator, non-native species, intentionally planted. Purpose, navigation marker from pre-GPS era. Marcus consulted the tablet and found the red dot marking his next destination. The coordinates were nearly a mile to the southeast, up a steep ridge that would be difficult to climb in current conditions. But it was the botanical clue that intrigued him. Non-native species used as navigation markers suggested old-growth logging operations from the early 20th century. Loggers had sometimes planted distinctive trees or shrubs at key points along their routes, species that wouldn't occur naturally in Olympic Peninsula forests, but would serve as landmarks for future operations. Most of these markers had been forgotten decades ago, but Marcus had encountered them occasionally during his ranger work. The elevation change was significant, 400 feet of climbing through terrain with no established trail. But Marcus's spatial memory was already working on the problem. If the destination was a pre-GPS navigation marker, it would be positioned for maximum visibility, probably on a ridge line with clear sight lines to other landmarks. Marcus started climbing, using his natural orientation skills to maintain heading despite the lack of visible references. The forest canopy blocked most GPS signals, but he could still sense direction through subtle environmental cues, the way moss grew on tree trunks, the angle of erosion patterns, the slight difference in vegetation between north-facing and south-facing slopes. 40 minutes of steady climbing brought him to a narrow ridge where the forest opened enough to provide views of the surrounding terrain. And there, impossible to miss once you knew to look for it, was a massive European beech tree standing alone among the native conifers. The beech was ancient, easily a century old, planted as a sapling by loggers who needed a distinctive landmark visible from multiple valleys. It had thrived in the Olympic Peninsula's climate, growing into a specimen that would have been impressive even in its native habitat. At the base of the beech, Marcus found the third case. The note inside was more detailed. Navigation marker confirmed. Logging company, Peninsula Timber, established 1912. This tree marked the intersection of two major timber routes. Modern significance, emergency cache point for backcountry operations. Search radius 50 meters. Cache identifier, 3 parallel blazes on Douglas fir, chest height, western exposure. Marcus understood immediately. Dr. Kieran wasn't just testing his ability to find locations, he was testing his knowledge of forest management history and emergency protocols. Someone with Marcus's background would know that modern backcountry operations often used old logging markers as reference points for supply caches. It took 15 minutes of systematic searching to find the Douglas fir with 3 parallel blazes cut into its western side. The cuts were old, but maintained, clearly part of an official cache system. Behind the tree, concealed under a camo tarp and secured with a small combination lock, Marcus found a professional supply cache. The combination was written on the note, 1958, the year Olympic National Park had established its current backcountry emergency protocols. Inside the cache, Marcus found standard emergency supplies, water purification tablets, energy bars, first aid supplies, and the fourth case. This note was different in tone. You're exceeding all performance parameters, Mr. Reed. Your ability to synthesize historical knowledge with current operational requirements is genuinely impressive. Dr. Kieran was correct about your exceptional capabilities. Next challenge, pure navigation. No landmarks, no electronic assistance. Coordinates, return to Thermal Springs Trail, mile marker 6.8, then bearing 127 degrees for 0.4 miles. Terrain, creek bed, seasonal flow, requires water reading skills. Target, natural shelter formation, occupied within last 48 hours. Marcus realized that the notes were no longer signed with Dr. Kieran's name. Someone else was monitoring his progress, updating the challenges based on his performance, which meant Kieran had assistance. This wasn't a solo operation. The coordinates placed his next destination back toward the main trail, but in an area Marcus knew was particularly challenging. Creek beds in this part of the park were often seasonal, flowing during winter and spring, but reduced to scattered pools during dry periods. Reading water flow patterns required understanding both current conditions and seasonal variations. Marcus consulted his compass and started the descent back toward the Thermal Springs Trail. But as he hiked, he found himself analyzing the challenges from a different perspective. Each test had built on the previous one, creating a comprehensive evaluation of his capabilities. Someone with extensive knowledge of search and rescue operations had designed this sequence. Dr. Kieran claimed to be a former military psychologist, but the sophistication of these challenges suggested additional expertise. Forestry background, advanced wilderness skills, detailed knowledge of Olympic Peninsula geography and history. Either Kieran was far more qualified than he'd indicated, or Marcus was dealing with multiple opponents. The descent took 30 minutes, bringing him back to the Thermal Springs Trail just as the note had specified. Mile marker 6.8 was barely visible, a small metal tag nailed to a tree beside the path. From there, Marcus took a bearing of 127 degrees and started into unmarked forest. The terrain was exactly as challenging as predicted. The creek bed was mostly dry, but recent rains had left pools and muddy sections that required careful navigation. Marcus found himself using all of his water-reading skills to identify the most stable route through terrain that could shift from solid ground to knee-deep mud without warning. After 20 minutes of careful progress, Marcus spotted what he was looking for, a natural rock formation that created a shallow cave, barely large enough for 3 people, but positioned to provide shelter from weather. And there, unmistakably, were signs of recent occupation. The shelter showed evidence of careful use, no trash, no permanent modifications, but clear signs that people had spent time here recently. Compressed areas where sleeping bags had been laid out, a ring of stones positioned for a small cooking fire, boot prints in the mud outside the entrance. Marcus found the 5th case wedged into a crack in the rock wall. But when he opened it, instead of another note, he found something that made his blood run cold, a photograph. The image showed the Thompson family, father, mother, and 8-year-old daughter, sitting in what appeared to be a different cave or shelter. They looked tired but unharmed, though their expressions showed fear and confusion. In the corner of the photograph was a timestamp, yesterday's date, 3:47 p.m. Under the photograph was a final note, handwritten in different script than the previous messages. Final challenge, Mr. Reed. You have demonstrated exceptional navigation, historical knowledge, and water-reading capabilities. But the last test requires your most important skill, the ability to think like your opponent. Dr. Kieran is waiting for you at the original clearing. Return there by sunset with the answer to this question. Where are the Thompsons currently located? You have all the information you need. The answer requires spatial memory, pattern recognition, and understanding of tactical positioning. Choose wisely. Time remaining, 47 minutes until sunset. Marcus checked his watch. 5:36 p.m. 47 minutes to return to the clearing and provide the correct answer, with 3 lives hanging in the balance. But as he studied the photograph more carefully, Marcus began to see patterns that suggested the final challenge was more complex than it appeared. The rock formation visible in the photograph looked familiar, but not identical to the shelter where he'd found the image. Similar geological structure, but different scale, different orientation. As if the Thompson family was being held in a location designed to be recognizable, but not immediately identifiable. Marcus thought back through all the challenges, looking for connections he might have missed. The old ranger station foundation, the logging company navigation marker, the emergency cache system, the seasonal creek bed. Each location had been chosen not just for the specific skills required to find it, but for what it revealed about the overall pattern. Dr. Kieran hadn't just been testing Marcus's capabilities. He'd been providing clues to the Thompson family's location. Each challenge had eliminated certain possibilities while highlighting others. The pattern wasn't random. It was an elimination matrix designed to guide Marcus to a specific conclusion. Marcus started running back toward the original clearing, his mind working through the tactical implications. If Kieran was waiting for him there, and if the Thompson family was being held somewhere else, then the location had to be close enough for Kieran to monitor both situations simultaneously, but secure enough that the family couldn't escape or be found accidentally. As he ran, Marcus remembered something Dr. Kieran had said during their first conversation. If you were to use that remarkable spatial memory of yours, you might realize that we're currently standing in a location you visited before. The Morrison Search. The hidden ravine where Marcus had found the solo hiker's remains in 2019. But there had been something unusual about that search, something that had bothered Marcus at the time. The ravine had shown signs of previous human use. Old rope anchors, fire rings that predated Morrison's visit, evidence that someone had been using the location as a regular campsite. Marcus reached the clearing just as the sun touched the horizon. Dr. Kieran was waiting exactly where Marcus had left him, sitting calmly on the fallen log, as if the intervening hours had been a pleasant intermission. 43 minutes, Kieran said without checking his watch. Well within acceptable parameters. I trust the challenges were educational. Where are they? Marcus demanded. That depends entirely on your answer. You were asked to determine the Thompson family's current location. Do you have a conclusion? Marcus felt all the pieces clicking into place. The Morrison Ravine, but not where we found the body. There's a secondary chamber, accessible through the gap in the rock formation. You've been using it as a base camp for months, maybe years. Doctor. Kieran's expression showed genuine surprise. Elaborate. The rope anchors I found during the Morrison search weren't for rescue operations. They were for regular access to a hidden section of the ravine. You've been conducting these experiments for longer than you admitted, using that location as your holding area, because it's geologically concealed and accessible only to someone with advanced climbing skills. Continue. The Thompson family is there now, in the secondary chamber, close enough for you to monitor their situation, but isolated enough that they couldn't escape or signal for help. You chose the Morrison site for our meeting because it's directly above your actual base of operations. Dr. Kieran stood and began to applaud slowly. Exceptional, Mr. Reed. Truly exceptional. You've not only demonstrated the individual capabilities I was testing, but you've synthesized them into strategic analysis that goes well beyond what I had anticipated. So I'm right? You're absolutely correct. The Thompson family is indeed in the secondary chamber of the Morrison Ravine, approximately 200 feet below where we're currently standing. They've been there since yesterday evening, comfortable and safe, waiting for you to complete your trial. Marcus felt relief flood through him, followed immediately by anger. This was never about testing my abilities. You just wanted to prove you could manipulate someone into following your elaborate game. On the contrary, Dr. Kieran said seriously, this was entirely about testing your abilities. You've just proven something remarkable about human potential under pressure. In less than 5 hours, you've completed a series of challenges that would defeat most professionals, culminating in a tactical analysis that required you to think several steps ahead of your opponent. Now let them go. Of course, I'm a man of my word, Mr. Reed. But first I want you to understand what you've accomplished here. You've demonstrated capabilities that transcend normal human parameters. Your spatial memory, your pattern recognition, your ability to synthesize disparate information into accurate conclusions. These are not ordinary skills. Dr. Kieran walked over to his equipment pack and pulled out a thick file folder. I've been documenting exceptional individuals for 15 years, Mr. Reed. People who demonstrate capabilities that suggest human evolution is far from complete. You've just proven that you belong in that category. I don't want to belong in any category you're involved with. Perhaps not. But you should understand that what you've accomplished today has implications beyond this specific situation. You've proven that exceptional individuals can function at levels that most people would consider impossible when properly motivated. Dr. Kieran opened the file and showed Marcus pages of documentation, photographs, case studies, detailed analyses of other individuals who had apparently undergone similar tests. Each person in this file has demonstrated capabilities that suggest human potential extends far beyond what we currently understand. Marcus realized he was looking at evidence of a systematic program spanning years, possibly decades. How many people have you done this to? Tested? Dozens, but only a few have demonstrated your level of capability. Most fail at the second or third challenge. Some refuse to participate entirely, but occasionally someone like you proves that exceptional individuals exist and that they can transcend normal limitations when faced with genuine necessity. You're talking about kidnapping and terrorizing innocent people for some twisted research project. I'm talking about discovering what humans are truly capable of when stripped of the artificial supports that modern civilization provides. You've just proven that exceptional individuals can evolve beyond normal parameters. Dr. Kieran closed the file and returned it to his pack. The Thompson family will be released as promised. They'll be found by park rangers tomorrow morning with a plausible story about getting lost and finding shelter. No harm will come to them. What about you? I'll continue my research, Mr. Reed. There are other exceptional individuals who deserve the opportunity to discover their true capabilities, other tests to be conducted, other limits to be explored. Marcus realized that letting Dr. Kieran walk away meant condemning other innocent people to similar ordeals. But he also realized that the man had prepared for this contingency. If he'd been conducting these experiments for years, he had escape routes and contingency plans that Marcus couldn't hope to counter alone. "Don't do this again," Marcus said quietly. "I can't promise that, Mr. Reed. The research is too important, the implications too significant, but I can promise that our paths probably won't cross again. You've already proven what I needed to know about exceptional human capabilities." Doctor Kieran shouldered his pack and walked toward the edge of the clearing. The rope you'll need to access the secondary chamber is anchored to the large cedar at the west edge of the ravine. Follow the original rappel route, but continue past the first landing to the concealed entrance. The Thompson family has food, water, and basic supplies. They'll be grateful to see you. Kieran. The man turned back. "If I ever hear about anything like this happening again, I'll find you. And next time, you won't be controlling the game." Dr. Kieran smiled, but there was something different in his expression. Respect, perhaps, or recognition. "I believe you would, Mr. Reed, which is exactly why you're so exceptional. You've learned to think beyond normal human limitations." He disappeared into the forest, leaving Marcus alone in the clearing as darkness settled over Olympic National Park. But for the first time in hours, Marcus felt like he was in control of the situation. It took 20 minutes to locate the rope anchors and another 30 to rappel into the Morrison Ravine. The secondary chamber was exactly where Marcus had deduced it would be. A concealed opening in the rock wall, accessible only through a narrow passage that would be invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Inside, Marcus found the Thompson family huddled around a small battery-powered lantern, tired and frightened, but unharmed. The father looked up as Marcus appeared in the entrance, his face showing relief and confusion in equal measure. "Who are you?" he asked. "Marcus Reed. I'm here to get you out." Over the next hour, Marcus helped the family gather their belongings and guided them through the complex route back to the surface. The parents asked few questions, focused mainly on keeping their daughter calm and following Marcus's instructions for navigating the difficult terrain. It wasn't until they reached the Thermal Springs Trail that Mrs. Thompson finally spoke. That man, The one who brought us here. He said you would come. He said you were taking some kind of test." "Something like that," Marcus replied. "The important thing is that you're safe now." But as they hiked back toward the trailhead, Marcus found himself thinking about Dr. Kieran's words. The man had been right about one thing. Marcus had demonstrated capabilities that went beyond what he'd previously understood about himself. The combination of skills required to complete the challenges had pushed him to function at levels he hadn't known were possible. The question was, what to do with that knowledge? Dr. Kieran's methods were unquestionably wrong, but his observations about human potential weren't entirely invalid. Marcus had discovered that he was capable of far more than he'd realized, when the stakes were high enough and the motivation clear enough. They reached the parking area just after midnight, where Marcus used the emergency radio in his truck to contact park rangers and medical personnel. The Thompson family was checked over, debriefed, and released with instructions to follow up with their physician and local law enforcement. As Marcus drove home through the dark forest roads, he found himself thinking about Sarah, about the grief and purposelessness that had driven him back to the Olympic Peninsula in the first place. Dr. Kieran had been right about that too. Marcus had been struggling with meaning and direction since his wife's death, but the events of the last 12 hours had shown him something important. His skills weren't just professional capabilities. They were gifts that could make a real difference when people needed help. The question was how to use them constructively without the twisted motivation that Dr. Kieran had provided. 3 days later, Marcus submitted his resignation from the Wilderness Survival Company and applied to rejoin the National Park Service. In his application letter, he wrote, "Recent experiences have reminded me that some people have capabilities that are needed in specific situations. I believe my skills can best serve others in search and rescue operations." He never mentioned Dr. Kieran in any official report, though he did provide park administrators with detailed information about security vulnerabilities in the Olympic Peninsula backcountry. New protocols were implemented, additional ranger patrols established, and emergency communication systems upgraded. Dr. Kieran was never found, despite an extensive multi-agency investigation. But Marcus sometimes thought about their conversation in the forest clearing, about the man's observations on human potential and evolutionary pressure. The methods had been unforgivable, but the underlying questions weren't entirely wrong. Marcus returned to work as a park ranger the following spring, specializing once again in search and rescue operations. But he approached the job differently now, with a deeper understanding of his own capabilities and a clearer sense of purpose. He had learned that exceptional individuals do exist, and that they have responsibilities that go beyond personal satisfaction. 6 months after the Thompson incident, Marcus received a package with no return address. Inside was a newspaper clipping about a missing family that had been found safe after 3 days in Glacier National Park. The family's rescuer was described as an experienced hiker who seemed to know exactly where to look. The clipping was accompanied by a brief note. "Some lessons are worth teaching, Mr. Reed. Some capabilities deserve to be discovered. Perhaps we'll meet again under different circumstances." Marcus burned the note and the clipping, but he kept the lesson. There were people in the world who needed finding, and there were individuals with the skills to find them. The challenge was making sure those skills were used for the right reasons. He never stopped looking over his shoulder when he hiked alone, but he also never stopped believing that human potential was worth developing when it was directed toward helping others rather than satisfying twisted curiosity. In the end, Dr. Kieran had been right about one thing. Marcus Reed was exceptional, but the man had been wrong about what that exceptionality was for. It wasn't about transcending normal human limitations. It was about using extraordinary capabilities in service of ordinary human decency. The forest would always hold dangers, but it would also hold people like Marcus Reed. ready to venture into the wilderness when someone needed to be brought home safely. And that, perhaps, was the most important lesson of all.